Hey everybody, it's Shelly. It is almost 11 o'clock. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty, typical Microsoft Google problems, and we will get started here shortly. Oh, I just saw a little note up there. Looks like Hangouts on Air is going away. We'll have to see what YouTube, they're changing it to YouTube on Air, youtube.com/webcam. So we'll need to check out what that's about, see what's going on there. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And if you can see my screen, I would very much appreciate a heads up on that. Let me make sure that it is showing. This is what I've been having trouble with, is this application window. Let's try it again. There we go. So now you should be able to see my screen. I'm going to go ahead and make this larger. Okay, so you will notice a chat box in the Hangout where if you want to write anything, I'll go ahead and do a welcome right now since we're right at 11 o'clock. Some housekeeping. This will be recorded. It is being recorded and shared with all paid registrants. If you're interested in getting this copy, just email sroth@shellyroth.com. And as we go through, I will have some things to share that I would like you to share and respond to in the chat. Okay, let's go back to the slide share. All right, if you can see this, please do let me know that you can. I would really appreciate that. And we are going to get started here just in a moment. Again, I apologize for any technical difficulty. Not surprising. It's always something when you're doing these things. And I've been doing them for a very long time. Now I can't control my PowerPoint. Big surprise, right? All right, let's try it from this way. Okay, so everybody should be able to see that. This is Gender 101, Gender Non-Binary. I keep changing the name of it to help people understand what we'll be covering. And we're basically going to cover the gender spectrum. What does that mean? All that good stuff. And my name is Shelly Roth, and my company is Springboard Training. And most people around Houston, Texas, and elsewhere know me as a social media trainer and navigator. I've been doing training and consulting on social media for the last almost 14 years now. I also am a constant contact email marketing solution provider. I've authored 4 books. My 4th book, you can see right there, Don't Call Me Ma'am, was authored about 1.5 years ago, and that's where I created my coursework and decided to come out as transgender, which we will talk about as we go through. So in the last 1.5 years, I've added some gender classes specifically on pronoun usage, help companies with their policies to make sure that they're inclusive, and I'll give you some ideas and tips on all that as we go through. Now, all profits from my book sales, Don't Call Me Ma'am, as well as any gender training, consulting, and speaking that I do, go to an organization here in Houston, glbthomeless.org, that helps out kids that, unfortunately, whose parents reject them because of their choices and the way and who they are. So it's a nonprofit you can look up with that link. Now, the easiest way to find me is at Shelley Roth, that's Shelley with an EY.com, and you can see all of these links go somewhere. This goes to my Facebook page. This goes to my Facebook secret, Facebook's term, group on gender diversity. Would love to have you join there. You can also sign up for my newsletter that goes out once a month where I share what's happening in the news with gender advocacy. And you can visit my diversity inclusion website. So the mission at Springboard is in alignment with the Center for Global Inclusion, which I became authorized by in 2017. And one of their missions, of course, is to create a better world by being respectful and fair for all individuals with their similarities and differences, as well as improving organizations' communication and performance by sustaining an environment that treats everybody fairly. And then, of course, I added my own objective and mission is to raise money and awareness for LGBTQ homeless youth as part of what I do. You can check out their website there. So today's agenda, we are going to talk about definitions. We'll go through the meanings of different things. We're going to talk about what does the gender spectrum or gender non-binary mean. I will share my story with you and why I'm doing this work now, and also gender neutral pronouns and how you can become an ally by starting to use those. If you are a company and you're looking for, or nonprofit, and you're looking for some suggestions for your policies, I will share that. Also, ideas on becoming an ally. And of course, we'll take Q&A as we go through. Feel free to ask anything in the chat area. And there is a resources section. As long as I have your email address, I will share with you this recording, as well as the slides, which have links and resources in them to access later. Again, anybody that's just joining us, we will be sharing this presentation as long as I have your email address, and I'll give you my contact details later. Now, some definitions. Well, back in 2007, over 10 years ago, Newsweek's cover issue stated "The Mystery of Gender." And people were starting to wonder, what is gender anyway? Is it more than physical details? History and science suggested that gender identity is much more complicated than biological birth, as we now know, fast forward over 10 years. And of course, gender identification is separate from sexual orientation, which we'll cover, as well as different from biological birth identity. Gender in the United States has historically been binary, male or female, based on what we see. Let's fast forward to 2017. National Geographic's issue was called Gender Revolution, and the whole magazine was dedicated to gender revolution. It's a fascinating read, and I encourage you to go find it, or Katie Couric did a TV special on it as well, so you can find that on demand, and it really takes a deep dive into what is gender identity. So we've really come a long way, and we have a much longer way to go. Now, the definition of gender as a noun, either of two sexes, male and female, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So that's important. The term is also used more broadly to denote a range of identities that do not correspond to established ideas of male and female. Again, thinking of male and female being on the binary. We're going to talk a lot about gender spectrum, gender non-binary, and it should become clear as we go through. Now, biological sex is what is assigned at birth based on the anatomy that is seen when the baby is born. Gender identity is something that is assumed and generally matches the assigned birth based on the baby's sex. Now, we're going to keep this simple today and just talk about two, male and female biological sex. However, with gender identity, a person's identity might not always match their assigned biological sex. Gender identity may be on a spectrum. It can be also termed gender expansive or gender non-binary. Sexual orientation is somebody's sexual preference, typically confirmed in adolescence. These are all different things that we're discussing. And then the fourth thing we'll cover is gender expression. And basically, gender expression is how one presents themselves, their hair, their dress, etc. We'll go into a little bit deeper dive on all of these. So my goal really today is to have you understand all those categories. Now, biological sex, when it matches a person's gender identity, whether it's a female or a male, that term is cisgender. Basically, you are on the binary, your birth sex matches your gender identity. So female born with female body parts whose gender identity is a woman would be a cisgender person or a cisgender woman. Same thing for a male. Now, gender expression doesn't have to match. A cisgender woman may decide she's going to a baseball game and wear clothes that are not as feminine. And a male may decide to wear clothes that are not as masculine. So it really is the gender identity matching the biological sex that makes one a cisgender person. And as we go through the slides, you will see links, etc. So as long as you have a copy of this, you'll be able to click on some of these links. Now you'll hear the term gender spectrum as we go through this and out in the world. But the gender spectrum just means that somebody is not one or the other. They are not binary. They are not just two. They can be across the spectrum with how they relate to their gender. So generally speaking, we're born biologically in a male or female body with male or female anatomy, yet gender can be on a spectrum. Now, interestingly enough, the majority of millennials, they just did a study with them, and the majority of millennials do not want to be defined as binary, as male or female. A recent survey of 1,000 millennials found that half of them think gender is a spectrum, which is fascinating if you think about how the world is changing. Now, as you can see, millennials make up the largest segment of the U.S. population at almost 87 million, compared to Gen X, which is next, baby boomers, which are next, and then Gen X. So fascinating study. Millennials don't want to be put on a binary platform. They want to be on a spectrum. Now, gender identity is something that we certainly don't know as we grow up. It takes a 3, 4, 5-year-old a while to start realizing what their body is and how they relate or identify with it. So it's not out of the gate. A cisgender person identifies their gender with their biological sex assigned at birth. Pretty binary, right? One or the other. But transgender people, and by the way, I am a transgender person and I do not. I was born biologically a female, but my gender identity is outside of my birth sex. I am a transgender person. Now, you'll also hear the term gender expansive or non-conforming, and of course, these folks are across the spectrum as well. What does that mean to be non-binary? Well, I thought I would include this and read it to you, but a non-binary or genderqueer, you'll hear that term, identity, are labels that refer to people who don't identify with any gender or whose gender changes over time. The word non-binary literally means someone whose gender falls outside of the male or female binary. You get the presentation. You can click on that link to learn more. Now, gender expression to me is pretty easy to understand. It's how one presents, their mannerisms, behaviors, how they do their hair, their speech patterns, their dress. And gender expression can be on a spectrum as well. Now, this is a screenshot of Elle Fanning, who starred in the movie 3 Generations, which I encourage you to find and watch. She plays a transgender male. But my point of having this there is Elle Fanning, really you would say their gender expression is male with a tassel cap and the loose clothes, etc. Now, using good old Barbie and Ken, in our presentation, we're going to make some assumptions. I know we should never make assumptions, but we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. We can say that Barbie and Ken, their biological birthday suit is male and female. Their gender identity, again, we're going to say, yeah, Ken, I would guess, is gender identity male, and Barbie, gender identity is female. They're on the binary. They're cisgender versus being on the spectrum. And of course, maybe they are, but we're just going to make this up as we go. Or non-binary, fluid, gender expansive. Their sexual orientation. Of course, we know heterosexual, gay or lesbian, bisexual, asexual, again, just another category. And their gender expression, I would think that we would say that pretty much Barbie's gender expression is feminine and Ken's gender expression is masculine, although I could point out that Ken with those red shoes might be on the gender spectrum with his gender expression. So just be aware those are the categories we're kind of looking at today. Now, the definition of a transgender person like myself, it describes people whose gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth. So I was born biologically a female. My gender identity is male. And if you know Laverne Cox, they were born biologically a male and their gender identity is female. I want to be very, very, very clear. I am not having gender affirmation surgery, at least not at this stage in my life. Lots, or I should say some, not lots, some transgender folks choose to have gender affirmation surgery. If it were as easy as Snapchat has made it, which I'll show you a screenshot later, that's one thing. But let's face it, surgery is expensive, it's painful, it's risky. Taking hormones is risky, and also, again, this is a choice people make, and I want to be very, very clear that the definition of a transgender person is not related to having affirmation surgery. I want to be very, very clear on that. Just because a transgender person does not choose to have gender affirmation surgery does not make them any less transgender. Now, if you're familiar with someone who's gotten a lot of press in the last year, Asia Kate Dillon, who is an actor on Billions, if you watch that series, and in the movie John Wick, I like to read what MX, by the way, MX is a new designation, and it just was added to the Oxford Dictionary. But they state, Asia's pronouns, by the way, are they and them, similar to my pronouns. We're going to talk about pronouns coming up. We all have an assigned sex. A gender identity is placed on top of that. I don't need to change my body in order to be valid as a non-binary person or as a trans person. So I thought I would include that because it just is perfect, in my humble opinion. And interestingly enough, there are lots of cultures that have third genders. So gender identity in different cultures can be different things. With Native Americans, they have a third gender called two spirits. Gender can be fluid across these cultures, and it refers to people whose gender and gender expression is different from what society expects for the binary. There are many cultures that recognize more than two genders. The Samoa culture has a third gender called Fa'afafine. It's a gender other than boy or girl. South Asia, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce some of these. Nigeria, Mexico, Thailand, Tonga, and believe it or not, even the United States has a third gender called Mahui in Hawaii. You can watch that video on the Mahui people. It's really interesting. Now, in the United States, in the mainstream, we have seen lots of exposure for different people in the gender non-binary world and transgender world. Of course, Caitlyn Jenner, the Olympiad decathlon gold medalist, I think everybody knows Caitlyn Jenner. Laverne Cox has gotten lots of exposure being an actor in Orange is the New Black. and an activist for the transgender community. There's a series on the Amazon Prime channel called Transparent. I strongly encourage you to check that out. It's an excellent series. I think they have 2 seasons of that. And then one thing getting lots of exposure is the Pose series on FX channel. This is the 2nd season this year. I just watched an episode last night that absolutely had me in tears. It's just a fascinating exploration and so true to the history of transgender folks. And most of the actors they are transgender actors, and they get to share that. And it's just a terrific series and helps with educating people about what it means to be transgender. And of course, as I mentioned, Asia Kate Dillon, the Billions actor, is non-binary. National Geographic's issue, as we said, you might want to check that out. Gender Revolution and the Katie Couric special can be found on demand. So there's been a lot of exposure, mainstream exposure in the United States for non-binary and transgender folks. The question that came up is, could gender be biological? Is there something that actually happens in the womb that impacts one's gender identity? Is it possible that at some point in development in utero, the baby gets signals and their signals are mixed? The brain gets one set of instructions and the anatomy another. And we can be very clear that if there's a struggle between the brain and the anatomy, the brain will win every time. This is a screenshot from the 2020 special. And you can see the baby in utero, the signals to the brain are blue or male, if you will, yet the signals to the anatomy are female. So it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what's uncovered, if that in fact could be something that happens in utero. Now we're going to do an exercise. I want you to take just a piece of paper and I want you to draw something very simple or write something very simple. Maybe draw a house or a flower, or write down an address or your favorite food, and take a couple seconds to do that. I've done this in the classes that I've done, and it's a good way to get an idea, because what I want you to do next is take that same image that you drew or whatever you wrote down, and I want you to use your non-dominant hand. I want you to draw or write down the same thing. So if you're a righty, use your left hand. If you're a lefty, use your right hand. And while you're doing that, I will take a sip of water. Again, feel free to share with us in the chat section. And since I'm having difficulties with Google Hangouts, maybe because they're getting rid of it, I may come back to this later versus leave my screen sharing mode, because I'm afraid I won't get it back. But I want you to go ahead and describe, how did that feel to draw or write with your non-dominant hand, and describe the how it felt and the resulting picture or text. And we'll kind of review these when I get out of the screen share mode here. But what words describe how that felt for you? The words I've gotten in the past are difficult, unnatural, unbalanced, funny, strange, awkward. And the reason I share this exercise is a colleague of mine, Hannah Simpson, knows a transgender woman, and she states, and I'm going to read this to you, I compare being transgender to handedness. How do you know you're right-handed or left-handed? No one tells you. You're not born with a mark on your hand telling people what you are. You just know. When you put something in the wrong hand, you know it feels wrong, not right. That's how gender is. When a trans person is walking around the world in the gender they're not, they know it feels wrong. They just know. And when they live authentically, it's like picking up a pencil in the right hand. It feels good. It feels natural, organic, and right. So I like to share that because as a transgender person, I just love this exercise. A lot of transgender folks, including myself, have something called gender dysphoria, and it's basically conflict between one's physical or assigned gender and the gender with which he or she or they identify. People with gender dysphoria may be very uncomfortable with the gender they're assigned at birth, sometimes described as being uncomfortable with their body, being uncomfortable with their roles as an assigned gender. And I can tell you, as a transgender person, I've had gender dysphoria all my life. Having affirmation surgery, that's most likely why a lot of folks, including myself, would have gender affirmation surgery. It would be a lot easier, in my opinion. But again, surgery is nothing to mess with. There's a good link there if you want to read more about gender dysphoria. And before I tell you my story, I want to put this out there because I also found this and I thought it was really interesting. This is what it's like to be transgender. Sometimes the wrong label just gets put on the wrong product. There's nothing wrong with the label. And there's nothing wrong with what's inside the can. They just don't match because a mistake happened. Yet at the end of the day, the part that matters is what's inside the can. No amount of denial or stubbornness will make those carrots turn into peas. So love that. Thought I'd include that. And with that, I'm going to share with you my story. And why am I sharing my story now at this stage in my life and in my business? Well, I've always, since I've discovered I was transgender, which I'll share with you here in a moment, I've always suppressed my gender identity. And when you live a lie, needless to say, it's not a good feeling. It left me frustrated, angry, feeling like I didn't belong and wasn't equal to all. I had and have gender dysphoria. I really feel 6'2", like I'm in a buff male body. But when I look in the mirror, of course, I see a female body staring back at me. My daily interactions with food servers or medical providers or anybody really, the Kroger checkout line, bring me back to, quote, reality, which is certainly not my reality. I like to share this painting by Jim Tweedy called Self-Portrait, where the beagle is looking in the mirror, and what the beagle really feels inside is a German Shepherd. And I just love this because it really, if I could really look back and paint what I see inside, it's that buff male body, 6 foot tall quarterback dude. Now, what most people see and have assumed when they see me since as long as I can remember, of course, a tomboy, I've heard that most of my life. Excuse me. A lesbian, a female. But you know what? Don't assume what you see. You know, we need to start being more aware that what you see, it might not be what's real for that person. In my case, I am a transgender person. Thank you to Snapchat, I was easily able to have facial hair and look like the guy I feel like inside. So don't assume. And we're going to talk about pronouns. I'm going to tell you the simplest way to stay gender neutral and not misgender people out there in the workplace, in your place of employment, or in the world in general. Now, I was born in a biological body that didn't match my gender identity. Needless to say, I had gender dysphoria. I was uncomfortable physically, mentally. That's a picture of me, by the way, with my oldest brother, Alan. And my mom always had bows in my hair. And at this stage, I wasn't aware of my body. So I was good and happy. Actually, we'll get into that in a moment. But as I became aware of this conflict in my mind and my body not matching, I became incredibly introverted, very unhappy, and angry. As a matter of fact, as I grew older, my parents called me a miserable soul. Imagine growing up with that, being called that. And you know what, though? I have to tell you, they were absolutely right. I was a miserable soul. I was a miserable person. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. I was never comfortable in my body. I rarely talked. I got more and more shy. I had zero confidence, and I had it made up that I was stupid. I was a very unhappy person. Now, as you can see on the left-hand side, those are my two brothers, Alan and Normie, and there's me That's about as close as I got to the crew cut that I wanted. And my mom, of course, was always dressing me in skirts and bows. And there I am hugging my best friend, Sally. I always did like the girls, no doubt about that. I was basically born in a body that I didn't understand and didn't relate to or identify with. And then what happens, of course, that is me standing in front of a pool in a bikini. I was given this beautiful female body and long silky hair, and really all I wanted was a crew cut and a male physique. Keeping in mind, I was probably about 20 in this picture. I had no clue what a transgender person was. I want you to notice in some of the pictures going forward, you'll notice this long hair. I think one of the reasons I might have had long hair was to cover the breasts that I absolutely hated. At the time, who knew what was going on? So what was a very unhappy, good-looking girl, in quotes, to do? Well, Miss Roth got betrothed. Yep, sure enough, I was in Squirrel Hill, I was in the newspaper, and I got engaged to a wonderful guy, I might add, and handsome guy. And it was probably the thing that I shouldn't do. Now, the good news is we never got married. And fortunately, I started down a path starting to question what is going on here. But it took a long time to get there. But in the meantime, anytime I had a chance to be a dude, if you will, like I was in Mexico on vacation, and this little Vespa might as well have been a Harley because it made me feel so good. Anytime I can, I want to be 10, 12 inches taller. So in this case, I was standing on a rock with my partner. And then what I like to term my Michael Landon look, if anybody remembers Michael Landon, because my hair was kind of dude-like and you couldn't see my breasts. So I felt really good about that picture. And then needless to say, Halloween was one of my favorite holidays because I got to dress like a guy character. So whether it was Alfalfa or a biker dude or my favorite, basically a gang dude with tattoos. And I'll tell you that I always had German Shepherds. I've had 3 German Shepherds because they reflected my inner aggression and toughness, if you will. So Halloween, needless to say, was one of my favorite holidays. Now, how and when did I even know I was a transgender person? Well, first, I became a great actor. From the age of 5 to 12, all I knew was to act like a girl, so I had to act like a girl. That's all I knew. As a teenager, I basically acted as a heterosexual young woman and a cisgender. Again, I had no clue what the gender spectrum was, what gender non-binary, what transgender. So if this is all you have to work with, you learn to act like what you think you have to be. Now, in college and young adult, I at least came out, if you will, as a lesbian woman, but I was still acting because if you truly understand what a transgender person is, I'm a transgender male, being a lesbian or cisgender, it was an act. Then at age 44, Lifetime had a show and I was watching it and the light bulb went off and the fireworks started. The show was an hour show on what a transgender person was. Finally, at age 44, I found out I am a transgender person. Well, needless to say, I was just absolutely blown away. And finally, I knew why I wasn't a happy person all my life. So affirming who I was and embracing myself was great. When I shared this news with others, my family, my friends, well, guess what? It was very minimizing. And I went back in the closet for 20 years, which is present day, if you will, a year and a half ago when I wrote my 4th book and came out. But they basically said, oh, you're not a transgender person. That's ridiculous. And again, very minimizing. So what do you do when people put you down? And certainly I didn't have the confidence at that point. I went back in the closet. But the great news is 20 years later, I wrote my 4th book, Don't Call Me Ma'am. I came out. I share my story in my book. And I realize it's not about me, not at this stage of my life. It's taking my gifts as an educator and a business person and helping raise awareness and money and be an example for others out there. So that's what I'm working on now. I still do my social media stuff, but my passion really lies now in making a difference. So I've created education. I'm out there training and speaking and bringing understanding to companies and organizations, teachers and parents. Also doing consulting, helping companies change, not just companies, but doctors' offices change their gender inclusion policy and their paperwork, if you will. And even though this is not what drives me to help their bottom line profits, when you misgender people, you are definitely impacting your bottom line profits. Nobody wants to be misgendered, whether it's a restaurant, a doctor's office, Kroger, Walgreens, anywhere you have customer facing employees. Misgendering does not help your bottom line. The main reason I do this is not for the bottom line results, but transgender people are at an extremely high risk to be bullied, sexually assaulted, or to attempt suicide. The show I watched last night on Pose just broke my heart because it was about transgender woman being murdered, and it just was too real and too close to reality for just really was tough. So that's why I'm doing this work. The alarming Centers for Disease Control 2019 data revealed that trans and gender nonconforming youth, 35% are bullied, 35% have attempted suicide in the past 12 months. And that is just unacceptable. And according to the National Center for Transgender Equality, 1 in 2 trans workers have faced adverse effects. 44% are passed over for a job. 23% were denied promotions. 26% were fired for being transgender, and 3 in 4 have experienced workplace discrimination. Through my education, I'm trying to raise awareness and money for LGBT homeless youth. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, how can you make a difference? Everybody on the planet can make a difference, and it really can start with something as simple as pronouns. There's just an article in the New York Times this past week that you can read. It talks about using gender-neutral pronouns. And the quote from the article is, and we're going to talk about these pronouns here in a moment, "They is a universal and purely neutral pronoun. When people encounter it, they infer nothing about gender. This makes the use of singular they a perfect pronoun. It's flexible, inclusive, unobtrusive, and mitigates the risk of inadvertent misgendering. And in most circumstances, it creates perfectly coherent sentences that people don't have to strain to understand. So I'm going to give you some examples of how to use this. Now, when we think of pronoun uses, she and he, of course, we know, and they has always been plural, but now with gender neutral pronoun they, you can use they and them and their as a gender neutral pronoun. You can see examples. I'll just use a couple. The other lab members rely on their expertise instead of her or his expertise. So again, replacing that her or his or he or she with they, them, their works just fine. Yes, you're going to get a few heads turning, especially people that are English majors, but to me, it's worth it not to misgender people to use that. You also see other pronouns. Wikipedia definition, singular they, pronoun they is inflected or derivative form of them, their, that's a gender neutral pronoun. And then ze and zer and ze and her, neopronouns are more modern pronouns used by people whose gender lies outside of the male-female binary, used in place of they. Commonly used pronouns you can see. Again, they, them, theirs are my pronouns of choice. And here's an example. Shelley presented to a diversity group last week on gender neutral pronouns. Instead of saying she, they were open and honest about the difference we can make for a transgender person. Their, instead of her, call to action was to be aware and ask what names and pronouns people prefer. bring Shelley to tell their story to your organization. So it takes some getting used to. It takes practice and education. As a matter of fact, I found a tool out there that you'll be able to click on. You can practice your pronouns, and you will even see when you're practicing your pronouns, there's a test. You can fill in the blanks with your guesses and click check answers and see how you're doing. So really cool little exercise to help practice pronouns. I haven't used this in one of my training classes, live training classes yet, but I do plan on using it. Now, gender neutral pronouns, I have to say kudos to Facebook, because for as long as I can remember, and I've been training businesses how to use Facebook for 13 years now, when you go and fill out your personal profile on Facebook, you can go in and go to custom gender and start typing in trans, and you'll see all the options. You can start typing in gender and you'll see all your options. So they've always given us an option to put in. They even let us use gender neutral pronoun they. So which pronoun do you prefer? Instead of her or him, wish them a happy birthday. So hats off to Facebook and kudos to them. And there are a lot of companies following suit, which we'll talk about here in a moment. The American Association of Law Libraries in Austin, about a year and a half ago, they had ribbons you could add to your name tag. My pronouns are. So you can go out and buy ribbons for your events. Vanderbilt have name tags for their faculty that include pronouns, as you can see. I have bands made, so when I work a show, I have bands that pronouns they, them, their, or she, her. So those have been very popular. But what you can do to be an ally, of course, you can add your pronouns to your LinkedIn profile and email signature. And you can also ask people when you're checking them in or taking information or just meeting them, what pronouns and name do you prefer? Such a simple thing. Here is a screenshot of my LinkedIn profile. You can see right next to my name, I put my pronouns in parentheses. Nothing else. It does start conversations. And that's the bottom of my email, Outlook email signature. This is just my canned signature while I state my pronouns are they and them. It's just a small way to be to educate and put it out there. Some other tips on your business card, you might be able to add your name and after that your pronouns. And then when you introduce yourself, you might just add, hey, my name's Shelley, my pronouns are they, them. It just makes it easy for people. Some other things, just be aware as an ally. Get involved, speak out, include gender diverse people in discussions, take on the work of being inclusive. Try and watch your pronouns. Think about your language and be willing to correct others. And if someone does make a mistake, don't make a big deal about it. When someone misgenders me and calls me she, they get all upset and I'm like, that's fine. Just the fact that you're even trying, I appreciate that. And of course, stay educated about the issues. And bring me in to speak to your group or company or your parents and teachers organizations. Now, to be part of our group, you can go to shelleyroth.com and join my Facebook group. You'll see a tab right there. It will take you there. You also can sign up for my newsletter. That'll keep you updated on what's happening out there. I also created something called the tip card. You can go to shelleyroth.com, click on the tip card and download this. I got so frustrated that every time I went to a restaurant where I'm paying for good food and quality service, I was being misgendered. So I created the tip card, and basically it's a postcard that I leave with my tip, basically thanking people for their service and also letting them be aware. I have started correcting them at the table now, but I'll also leave this, but letting them know to be conscious of the gender that they're choosing when they are interfacing with their clients. Be gender neutral. Use words like folks, my friends, you all, and they, them, there, of course. So if you want to download that and put your name and picture on it and leave it, please feel free to. Something else I participated in last year I want to make you aware of is the second International Pronouns Day is October 17th. There's a Facebook page you can go join if you'd like. It's a group. And also they have lots of events happening. I will be doing this presentation. Of course, it'll be revised by October 17th. Some policy ideas. I guess I'd ask you again, I'm afraid to get out of my screen sharing mode because I was having technical difficulties. So you might just share this in the comments when I get out of screen share mode here in a minute. But does your organization have any policies for gender nonconforming workers? Yes, no, we're considering policies, or what does that even mean? If you could share that with me, I would appreciate it. Happy to talk to your organization. You know, a lot of what I'm doing in the gender world, I do it at no charge and ask for donations because I want to get the word out there. I want to educate. So I'm happy to help your organization if budgets are limited. Some frontline communication tips and best practices. When you're addressing a patient, or just substitute patient with client or customer or prospect, avoid using gender terms like sir and ma'am. I know we've been trained in the South that that's good manners, but instead of how may I help you, sir, how may I help you today? When talking with coworkers or patients, avoid pronouns and other gender terms, or use gender-neutral words. For example, your patients in the waiting room, they're here for their 3 o'clock, not she is here or he is here. Politely ask what name and pronouns are preferred. Add this to your intake form. Add this to all of your forms where you need to ask that. How would you like to be addressed? And if you make a mistake, just apologize and move on. Some other policy and communications, create a protocol and follow that for noting preferred names and pronouns and how to address mail and leaving messages. I went to my doctor's office it's been about a year now, and when I told them that my pronoun choices to please add it to my chart, I do this with all my doctors now. Please add that to my chart so when I come in next time, I'm not misgendered. Have clear lines of referral for questions. Appoint a staff person responsible for providing guidance and setting procedures. And you have to educate people and re-educate. That's just the way it's going to be. It's not going to be overnight. Don't make assumptions. Ask open-ended questions instead of, are you married? Do you have grandkids? How about, who is in your family? Who's important to you? Instead of closed questions like, is this your spouse or your son or your daughter in this picture? It's better to open things up. I'd love to hear about these people if you'd like to share. Don't make assumptions. As Bob Dylan sang, the times they are changing. I'm going to share with you some of the changes going on out there. New York added a non-binary gender option on birth certificates effective January of this year. You can click male, female, or X. You can read the article there. In Philadelphia, non-binary teachers are embracing a non-binary honorific, MX. Thank you, hallelujah. And by the way, United Airlines just changed this. Here's a form someone sent me from the University of Texas Health Center, an intake form where you, instead of just male or female, they added transgender. I would like to see something more neutral than that, maybe gender non-binary or something like that as an option, but it's progress. And United Airlines, I was checking in for a flight a couple months ago, and I couldn't believe it. There was an option for gender undisclosed or unspecified. Thank you, everybody who's starting to change your intake forms. In 2017, Oregon added a third gender and granted non-binary status, and the District of Columbia began offering gender-neutral choice on driver's license and ID cards as an X. California legally recognized the third gender with passage of the bill SB 179. You can read more about that. And this just came out in the New York Times. Which box do you choose? I just shared this in my newsletter. Some states are offering a non-binary option as teenagers push for a driver's license to reflect their identity. The world's changing, everybody, and we're going to more and more, we're going to have to be aware. And the New York Times article on driver's license options, Hawaii offered non-binary options July 1st of 2020. The X option will appear. So progress is being made. And this was amazing. I don't know if you watched the Super Bowl in 2018. I know this is a little bit dated, but Coca-Cola's ad, which you can watch on the video link if you get this presentation from me, that there's a Coke for Z and he and she and her and they and them, and it was all different pronouns. And you can see the comments on Twitter. Twitter is blowing up that, hey, Coca-Cola acknowledged pronouns during the Super Bowl. So it was a big deal. And then Miss Manners had a question from someone on gender neutral pronouns. And the last time I looked, there were over 500 comments. So even Miss Manners back in January of 2018, I thought I'd include that for you to take a look at. Now, if you want to keep up to date, you can go to ShellyRoth.com and join our gender diversity Facebook group. You can sign up for my newsletter at ShellyRoth.com as well. Some of the classwork that I do, whether it's public like this webinar or in front of a business, salespeople, marketing people, human resources people, why language matters, don't call me ma'am, Gender 101, all that's my coursework. And then, of course, if you need help with your policies and procedures, I'm happy to come into your company and help with that. All proceeds from my book sales as well as training and consulting go to glbthomeless.org here in Houston. If you'd like to donate, shoot me an email and I'll tell you more about it. And remember, and by the way, we're going to get to questions here in a moment. Love is love. Treat others as you want to be treated. We're all souls on this earth doing the best we can do. Love thy neighbor. And in bold, don't ask questions you wouldn't want asked of yourself. Now, if you want to see what's coming up, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or my next gender, go to Shelly Roth and click on events, and you'll see I have Power of Email Marketing, some of these other live classes here in Houston or Lunch and Learns, and my next gender non-binary 101 if you have someone you want to invite. So let's go ahead now. I'm not going to still stay with screen share, but I'm going to go over to the chat area, and hopefully Google will cooperate with us. Sometimes you just never know. See if we have any comments or questions in the chat area. Feel free to jump in. Everybody, you will get a copy to this, not just to the recorded session, but also you will get a copy to the PowerPoint slides, so you can click on the links. And there's a huge resources section here. Let me show you that real quick. Of course, they're going to let me take you to the resources section that has a lot of good stuff. In here, there's some videos on pronouns, the gingerbread person, youth report, all kinds of good stuff you can go to there and learn more about. And go ahead and get this screen share back on. Contact information up on that screen. Okay. We don't look like nobody shared. There's a couple comments when we did that pencil exercise, but they were the same things that we shared before, so we're not going to review those. We still have a few minutes. I'll kind of hang here if anybody wants to jump in and share in the chat. If you have any questions, of course, there's my email, sroth@shellyroth.com. You can send me something. And since we don't have anything, then I am going to go ahead and we're going to stop the broadcast, and I'll be sending this out to everybody that was registered, and it will be available on my YouTube channel, which you can find at shellyroth.com and click YouTube. Have a great rest of your Friday and a wonderful weekend, and hope to see you here in Houston or local class or online.